Hey everyone, and welcome to the origin of Barbie of Swan Lake. Today we'll be soaring through this movie released on the 30th of September 2003. Its roots lie in the ballet called, you guessed it, Swan Lake. Let's just dive right into it. Usually I'd start by outlining who wrote the original tale. In this case, unfortunately, no evidence remains of who came up with the idea of Swan Lake. All we know is that the director of the Moscow Imperial Theaters, named Vladimir Petrovich Begichev, commissioned our favorite musical genius Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky to compose the score for Swan Lake. The outline of what Tchaikovsky was tasked to compose was done by Julius Reisinger, the choreographer of the production. One of the theories as to who created the story is that it was Begichev, possibly together with Ekaterina Geltzer, who was a danseur of the Moscow Imperial Bolshoi Theater. Another theory is that it was Reisinger. There's even been rumors that Tchaikovsky himself may have had a hand in the creation of this tale, since he was very interested in the life story of Bavarian King Ludwig II. This king was nicknamed the Swan King. His ending was very similar to Odette and the Prince, namely that he drowned himself in a lake. But this happened nearly a decade after the debut of Swan Lake, so that theory has been debunked. So now that we know that we don't know who has written the original libretto, is there perhaps any certainty to be found in whatever has inspired whoever wrote it? Sadly, opinions differ wildly here as well. There are countless stories involving what is called a swan maiden, which is a mythical creature that can shapeshift between human and swan. There are also many tales that have the false bride theme, in which the man gets deceived into marrying the wrong woman. However, there are two fairy tales that many people say could very well be the origin of the original plot of Swan Lake. The first is called Der Geraubte Schleier, which means the stolen veil in German. It's written by Johann Karl August Musaus in 1784. In this story, a man called Friedbert discovers a flock of swan maidens. These enchanted swans can change into humans by taking off their crown and veil. When the maidens are bathing in a lake, Friedbert steals one of the veils. This prevents the youngest maiden, called Caliste, to turn back into a swan. Instead, she turns into his bride. Notably, Friedbert's friend is called Benno. This is interesting because the friend of the prince in the original Swan Lake libretto is also called Benno. The other possible source is called The White Duck, a Russian fairy tale collected by Alexander Afanasyev in AD 58. In this story, a newlywed king leaves his wife to go on a journey. While he is away, the newbie queen gets lured by a witch and turned into a white duck. Then the witch turns herself into the queen and takes her place. Eventually though, the king finds out what happened, the queen turns back into her human self, and the witch gets dismembered. You know, the usual stuff. This fairy tale might be the origin of Odile taking Odette's place. Now that we've gone over the possible writers and inspirations, it's time to go over the original libretto. Swan Lake premiered on the 4th of March 1877, and it consisted of 4 acts. We start with Prince Siegfried, who's just become 21 years old. His mother wants him to marry soon, so she's put together a ball in which he has to choose a bride. When Siegfried and his friend Benno spot a flock of swans, they immediately go after them. They arrive at a lake where they lose sight of the swans. Instead, a woman greets them. It turns out she's Princess Odette. She and her friends are swan maidens. Her mother was a good fairy, but unfortunately passed away. Her father is a knight who got remarried to a wicked witch. This witch, who by the way can turn into an owl, remember that. She wants to kill Odette, but luckily her grandfather has protected her. He cried a lake of tears over the death of his daughter, Odette's mother. To shield her from the same fate, he has given Odette a crown which protects her from harm. Once Odette gets married, for some reason the witch won't be able to hurt Odette anymore. Here's when Siegfried pledges his love for her, because that's just how these things go, you know. This is also when the dance of the little swans happens, which is a dance that the Swan Lake Ballet is very famously known for. Back at the castle, the ball is in full effect. Several princesses from all over the world come to dance for Siegfried, among which of Hungarian, Spanish and Neapolitan nationality. Siegfried refuses to marry any of the ladies. Then Odette arrives. Or so Siegfried thinks. Benno doesn't think this girl looks like Odette at all. Turns out he's right. It's Odile, with her father Baron von Rothbard at her side. Behind the scenes, Baron von Rothbard and Odette's stepmother are conspiring together. Siegfried dances with Odile and is head over heels, resulting in them agreeing to marriage. Right then and there, von Rothbard shows his true colors. He turns into a demon. Odile just laughs, and yes, I know that you're hearing what I'm hearing in my head right now, while a white swan with a crown on its head appears in the window. Siegfried runs away. As soon as Odette has returned to the lake, she tells her swan maiden friends what happened, clearly distraught. When her friends see Siegfried beelining towards them, they flee and they ask Odette to come with them. She replies that she wants to have one last talk with Siegfried. While a storm is beginning to form, Siegfried begs Odette for forgiveness. She can't give him that, or simply just doesn't want to, which, I mean, good for her, and attempts to leave. I guess this trampled all over his precious man pride or whatever, because what happens next is just baffling. He grabs her crown, yeets it into the lake, and tells her, willing or unwilling, you will always remain with me. An owl snatches the crown and flies off with it. Odette, again, rightfully so, goes, what the heck, dude, and becomes motionless. The storm makes the lake rise, which causes them both to drown. It ends in such a morbid way though, like the swans return and they start to chill on the very lake that just drowned their queen. So yeah, obviously the original story of Swan Lake is tons of fun. Since then, many different versions have been created by many different companies all over the world, some of which even have a happy ending. But overall, this ballet is known for being tragic. The most famous version of Swan Lake is the revival of 1895. If you've seen my origin video of Barbie and the Nutcracker, shout out, you'll encounter some familiar names here. Let's start off with Ivan Velivoloshky, director of the St. Petersburg Imperial Theaters. He wanted this revival to happen and appointed Marius Petipa as the producer. Our main man, there he is again, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, was delighted that Petipa was to be the producer. Tchaikovsky had of course already composed the score for the original 1877 libretto, but wanted to try his hand at it again for the revival because he was dissatisfied with his original score. Sadly, it wasn't meant to be. Tchaikovsky passed away in 1893, just 14 months before the revival happened. And thus, the score for the revival was revised by a fellow called Riccardo Drigo, with approval from Modeste Tchaikovsky, Pyotr's brother. Eventually it was decided that Marius Petipa would choreograph the first and the third act, and that Lev Ivanov would choreograph the second and the fourth. As for the plot, it starts out pretty much the same up until Odette and Siegfried meet each other, and then the story diverges. Princess Odette and her friends are under a spell from the evil genie named von Rothbard. By day, they are fated to be swans, and only at night, and only in proximity of the lake, can they change back into their human form. The evil genie watches over them in his owl form. The only way to break the spell is if someone falls in love with Odette. What makes it even trickier though is that it has to be someone who has never sworn their love to anyone else before. Siegfried is horrified at the thought that he came this close to killing Odette in her swan form. He even breaks his vow in anguish. To console him, Odette and her friends start dancing for Siegfried. He soon tells her that he has yet to vow his love to anyone, so he could be her rescuer. He's intent on killing the genie to free Odette, but Odette explains to him that that is impossible. The only way for them to end the genie is if someone sacrifices themselves for Odette. When he convinces her that he is ready to fulfill that role, she reminds him that there is a ball tomorrow in which he has to choose a bride. He responds to that he will only choose a bride if she shows up at the ball. Bro, I'll be a swan when the ball takes place. You know that, right? Oh, I won't betray you, babe. It's gonna be okay. She accepts, but not before warning him that the genie will do anything to make him vow his love to someone else. Foreshadowing. We're now at the ball, and his mother asks Siegfried which of the young women pleases him most. He says they're all lovely, but none he can love. And then, von Rothbard and Odile arrive, the latter disguised as Odette. Siegfried is immediately overjoyed. Odette, of course in swan form, appears at the window and tries to warn Siegfried, but it's all in vain. Odile and Siegfried dance together, and not soon after he picks her as his bride. To seal the deal, von Rothbard puts his daughter's hand in Siegfried's hand and makes him vow eternal love. Only then Siegfried notices the white swan at the window and thinks, oh no, I've been deceived, and he makes a run for it. Odette returns to her swan friends to tell them that the spell is now eternal. Currently in her human form, she wonders if it would be better to just drown herself in the lake instead of living without Siegfried. The swans try to console her. Siegfried runs to her and desperately tries to explain everything. Odette forgets her grief. Then von Rothbard completely destroys the mood by appearing and telling Siegfried that he needs to marry Odile, and when he does, Odette will remain a swan forever. Odette states that she wants to die while there's still time. Siegfried vows right away to go down with her. This terrifies von Rothbard because he knows that if anyone sacrifices themselves for Odette, It's all over for him. After one last hug with Siegfried, Odette runs off a cliff. In a desperate attempt to save himself from Rothbard, turns himself into an owl, and he tries to turn Odette into a swan, unsuccessfully. Without a second thought, Siegfried jumps right after Odette, and as soon as he does this, the owl dies. This frees the remaining swans of the spell. They watch the souls of Odette and Siegfried ascend into heaven. So yeah, I guess this rendition has a little bit of a happier ending, although it isn't by much. I do like the fact that Siegfried stays strong and true and doesn't try to rip off the only protection Odette has just because she won't stay with him. Still, it's all very, very tragic. It's also interesting how the stepmother character and the von Rothbard character get molded into one singular character here, and that character is also clearly closer to the Rothbard we know in Barbie of Swan Lake. I personally think this is a good change, because von Rothbard to me is a far more interesting character than yet another evil stepmother. I'm glad he's getting more depth here, and also the story becomes way easier to follow when there's only one evil character to focus on. Well, except for Odile, but who can hate on this cutie? As you can imagine, Mattel didn't exactly want this ending for Barbie. Still, they chose this story to portray for the third installment. With the origin now in mind, let's see how they Barbie-fied this ballet. After the obligatory scene with Barbie and Shelley, we meet Odette. The music that plays here is the same music that also plays when Odette and Siegfried meet each other for the first time in the ballet. So while Daniel is nowhere to be seen yet, I feel like this is very fitting. As for Odette's home situation, she has a father who is a baker. Although her father's occupation may be different, he doesn't speak a word of her mother, which seems to imply they're either divorced or she's passed away, similar to the ballet anyway. But then, apparently Odette's got a sister named Marie, which honestly baffles me. Why is she here? Is this a very deep cut to the origin of the Nutcracker? Because she certainly has no place in the Ballet of Swan Lake. She only appears at the start of the movie and then for like a second halfway through the movie. She isn't even present at the party at the end of the movie. Very strange.
Any faster and you'll be flying.
Well, I won't, but you will.
Flying like the wind.
Okay, we get it. She'll be a swan soon. This whole scene with the bird. I guess all the comments about flying weren't enough foreshadowing. Apparently Shelley needs to be beaten over the head with metaphors to finally get it. Then we meet Daniel, so I'd like to talk about him for a second. He's a skilled archer, just like in the ballet. He kinda needed to be in order for the plot to work, so I'm glad they kept that in there, even though it's not the most family-friendly hobby for the protagonist's love interest to have. With him is his best friend, who is sadly not named Benno, but Reggie. The ballet provided such great names for the characters, but instead they went with Daniel and Reggie. Okay. We learned through the conversation with his mother that Daniel seems to have the same personality as Siegfried. He too is a free spirit, and he too is required to pick a bride at the upcoming ball his mother is throwing for him. We get a bit more depth here though, because we also see that Daniel is eager to learn about the world. I hope he will get the opportunity to learn a lot since his best friend is a flat earther.
But I'm tired, son.
Same girl, same. The next one we meet is Lila. The one thing I noted from this entire scene is that this guy taking aim at Lila mimics Daniel taking aim at Odette later on. One hefty action sequence later, Lila lures Odette to the enchanted forest. At least her glance at Odette here seems to indicate that she's doing this on purpose. Why? I don't know. During that trip, Odette gets similarly stuck like Lila, indicating that they'll soon get stuck in the same boat. Through the power of sheer physics, they reach the enchanted forest. In the ballet, the lake itself has a mystical reason of existing, but everything around it isn't magical. While this is definitely cut off from the outside world to preserve the magic of the entire forest here. We meet the creatures of the forest, some of which have interesting accents. More on that later. We also meet the Fairy Queen. At first you might think, yet another character we can't find in the origin. While this may be true, she doesn't feel super out of thin air for me. The way she holds herself, the way she treats Odette and the creatures. She reminds me of Odette's passed away mother, who was a good fairy. The Fairy Queen is the ruler here, whereas in the ballet, Princess Odette was the leader. Princess Odette's mother, aka the Queen, was a good fairy. A queen who's a fairy? This strengthens my theory. My friends and I watching Barbie movies.
Tell me when it's over.
No. Watch.
Okay. Now we're getting into the deep stuff. All the creatures here are elves that were cursed to take on animal forms. In a way, they're the swan maiden friends of the ballet. Except the curse works a little bit different here. The curse works 24/7 on everyone, including Odette when she gets cursed, which actually looks genuinely scary, by the way. It is the fairy queen that alters the curse so that they all get their human form back at night, the way we know the curse to be in the ballet. Oh, by the way, when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Except Lila, apparently. Lila is just like that. Realizing that, oh boy, they probably should have done this as soon as Odette freed the crystal, they forge a crown with the crystal embedded in it and give it to Odette. This seemingly insignificant detail is brilliant to me. In the original libretto, Odette receives a crown from her grandfather to protect her from harm. This crown does the same thing, lest we forget about the crowns in the Stolen Veil. Very, very clever. Now, who cursed them? None other than Rothbard. Yes, he is in this movie under his original name. Well, minus the font part. You'd think they'd make him a little less scary for a Barbie movie, but no, they just full on took the character of the ballet. They have him shapeshifting into some kind of raven-like creature, which is even scarier than the owl he is supposed to be. I love the fact that Adil shapeshifts along with him. I think it's a cute detail. He's not just evil for evil's sake though. He has a backstory here. Apparently he and the fairy queen are cousins? Yep, I definitely see resemblance. When it was time for their uncle to choose his successor, he picked the fairy queen instead of Rothbard, and this sparked Rothbard's evilness. So, how do we go about breaking the spell? The one who frees the magic crystal is the one who will overcome Rothbard and save the forest. That person will fall in love with someone, and that love will then defeat Rothbard. Somehow this makes a bit more sense to me than, yeah, she's the leader here, so she needs to be fallen in love with and sacrificed for. But what about the false bride theme? It's here! The Book of Forest lore dictates that if Daniel pledges his love to another, the magic crystal will lose its power. So, once Rothbard learns of this information, you know exactly what he will do with that.
I'm getting that crystal if I have to rip the crown right off her head.
Ooh, original libretto Siegfried vibes. Oh, we do not stand in this household. In the ballet, the prince gets lured by a flock of swans that he wants to hunt. Here, Rothbard in his bird form lures Daniel into the forest to make him hunt Odette in swan form. I like this change. It makes Daniel a bit less evil and Rothbard a bit more evil. They both lead to the same outcome. The prince sees the swan, takes aim, but ultimately decides not to shoot, after which the swan turns into a human. Oh, this scene has the girl power vibe I strive for! One simply cannot resist the call of the Odile.
But I could show you Swan Lake.
She said it, guys! She said the thing! Shout out to this outfit that Odette doesn't wear nearly long enough. I'm glad the movie spends some amount of time showing that Daniel and Odette are getting to know each other. It's still ridiculously love at first sight, of course, but I still really appreciate that they let the movie breathe here. At the end of his visit, Odette even calls him Daniel instead of Your Highness.
Daniel.
Spicy. This conversation here is one of the parts where this movie really shines for me. He mentions her family, and she does ask him to contact her father and sister, but not before she looks over to the elves, implying that she sees them as family just as much. Daniel's thick-headedness comes through strongly here, in the same way that Siegfried's did. Daniel wants to kill Rothbard with an army, doesn't think twice, just casually says he'll take the risk of him and his entire army getting cursed under his leadership. Unfortunately, the resemblance doesn't stop there. With some harsh, Siegfried-like emotional manipulation, he forces her to agree to come to the ball. So now that she's agreed to go to the ball, she needs to be prepared for it. The fairy queen makes a fleeting comment that she doesn't have much power left, but instead of preserving it, she uses it to give both herself and Odette sparkly dresses. Remember that I mentioned that the ballet contains dances of different nationalities? They get represented here. Ivan performs the Hungarian dance, Carlita performs the Spanish dance, and then the fairy queen and Odette perform the Neapolitan dance. I couldn't be happier that they managed to find a way to incorporate those dances in a sort of plot-relevant way. The accents Ivan and Carlita have are supposed to represent Hungary and Spain. Special shout out to Erasmus just having the time of his life. However short-lived it may have been. Sure hope those dresses were worth spending your last bit of magic on instead of saving Erasmus. Right, I haven't mentioned Erasmus yet. I think the inclusion of Erasmus is meant to symbolize that appearances can be deceiving. His introduction is of a giant, scary, roaring, angry troll, but he turns out to be such a sweet and lovely guy who honestly just needs a hug. Daniel will soon learn just how deceiving appearances can be. Ooh, now we're getting to the juicy bit. It is finally time for Best Girl to take center stage! After learning of a way to make the magic crystal lose its power, Rothbard immediately concocts a brilliant plan. In the ballet, Odile and Odette just happen to look alike to the point that they have the same dancer perform both roles just to hammer down the point that they look alike. Here, the two look nothing alike, which causes Rothbard to put a spell on Odile's third favorite necklace. How dare he? So that Daniel will see Odette instead of Odile. I actually really like this change because this feels much more true to Rothbard's wickedness. Rothbard actively thinks out and acts out a plan instead of just the happy coincidence that his daughter just happens to look like Odette and using that to his advantage. And with that, the false bride team can finally take place. At the ball, Daniel is eagerly awaiting Odette's arrival. Daniel's mother acts true to her origin, asking Daniel if none of the girls are to his liking. Mind you, in this version, Daniel absolutely has no clue that him professing his love to another person will have disastrous consequences. They only learned this after he had left the enchanted forest. In the ballet, Odette warns him for this and then he still ends up making that mistake. I'm honestly very glad they changed it because it would make him look stupid. He still kind of looks stupid because he should have been aware that she'd be a swan at this time of day. Maybe he is so blinded by love that he forgot about time and space or something. To be fair, he also has no reason to think that the girl in front of him, who looks exactly like Odette, isn't Odette. All in all, I can let this slide way easier than how it happened in the ballet.
Find someone wonderful to dance with while you wait.
May I?
Oh, I love him so much for this! It's here! The Black Swan Pas de Deux is here! It's super iconic, of course, and they actually kept the essence of the Black Swan Pas de Deux intact, with Odile twirling around a mesmerized Daniel. True to form, Daniel is the only one who sees her as Odette. The cinematography here is absolutely stunning, constantly switching perspective between what we see versus what Daniel sees. Seeing Odile's expression on Odette's face chills me to the bone. The only thing I really wish they added here is the one thing that the Swan Lake Ballet is known for, and that is the 32 fouettes that the ballerina performs as Odile. This means she revolves 32 times on one leg without break, with the other leg whipping around to propel herself on and not moving from her exact spot. It's such an impressive display of pure power, and it really shows that Odile is a force to be reckoned with. Regardless, Daniel asks Odile to marry him. Rothbard walks up to him and makes Daniel confirm that he loves her, exactly like in the revival. The crystal loses its power, causing Odette to become motionless. Odette also becomes motionless in the original libretto after Siegfried rips the crown off of her head, so this is a really cool similarity. Rothbard later on even takes the crown from her head to make it all full circle. Rothbard reminds Daniel of his proposal, even taunts him with it. I love how close this all is to the original. Even the tiny detail of Odette's friends fleeing the scene after the debacle has occurred. Such good stuff. Odette doesn't refuse to go with them because mainly, well, she can't.
Cute, the Three Musketeers.
Wrong movie, buddy. In the middle of one heck of a fighting scene, Odette regains consciousness and joins the party. She wasn't conscious when her crown was taken from her, so she has no idea that she's vulnerable right now. Daniel is as sharp as an arrow though, and he notices right away. Then, Rothbard kills them both. Yes, we have a genuine death scene in a Barbie movie. This honestly shocked me as a kid, and to be honest, it still kinda does now. The thing I don't like about this though, is if they're willing to go this far to stay true to the origin, they should have kept something in there in the way that Daniel would sacrifice himself for Odette. Something like Rothbard firing at Odette and then Daniel jumping in front of her to protect her, to sacrifice himself for her. That would have been brilliant. Then the next part of the magic crystal lighting back up again and destroying Rothbard would have made more sense as well, since Daniel sacrificed himself for Odette and that would be the act of true love. Now Daniel just gets caught up in the blow and they land perfectly on top of each other, and that somehow shows true love. Still, I have to give them kudos for going this hard. Rothbard is defeated and that breaks the curse for everyone. Well, except for Lila. Lila is just like that. If the movie had ended here, I would say that this is a perfect movie in terms of origin. It would have truly captured the tragedy that is Swan Lake. So yeah, thank you so much for... Oh, they're back. Yay! At least the little swan dance has a spot at the end here, with these 4 little cuties holding hands while dancing in sync to the Tchaikovsky music, beautifully throwing back one more time to the origin that is the ballet called Swan Lake. I wish I knew the origin of this movie when I was a kid. This movie improves dramatically when you're able to pick up all these little details that are incorporated. I'm sure with how many similarities there are in this movie, I must have missed a few. There are also a lot of things just added in randomly, but even those had some kind of basis in the origin. All in all, creating this video has given me a whole new appreciation of Barbie of Swan Lake, and I hope it did for you as well. Thank you so much for watching. Doei doei!